Okay, let's get right into this. The date is Friday, January 23, 2026. And if you've been following the news at all this week, you probably have this very distinct, very sinking feeling that the ground has shifted under your feet.
It's not just a feeling, it's a fact. And I don't mean a little tremor.
No, this is the kind of shift that, it cracks the foundation of the house. The world we woke up in on Monday is not the world we're living in today.
It really isn't. We are looking at a week where the quiet parts were finally said out loud, and the polite fictions we've been living with for decades were essentially just set on fire for everyone to see.
Right. Let's just lay out the pieces on the board.
Yeah.
We have Donald Trump back in the White House. This is Trump 2.0, fully operational, maybe even more unconstrained than the first time around.
Definitely more. And then we have Mark Carney, the former central banker, the ultimate establishment figure.
Right, Mr. Global Rules.
Mr. Global Rules himself, and he's now the Prime Minister of Canada. And these two forces just collided head-on at the World Economic Forum in Davos.
And from everything we're reading, this was not the usual Davos. This wasn't the cocktail party for the global elite we're used to seeing.
Not at all. Usually Davos is all about synergy and stakeholder capitalism and these, vague promises to do better by 2050. This year, it felt like a reckoning.
It sounds less like a networking event and more like a funeral. A funeral for the old world order.
That is exactly what it was. And the sources we have for this deep dive are, well, they're heavy. We have the full transcript of Mark Carney's speech, which people are already comparing to Churchill's Iron Curtain speech. That's the level of geopolitical weight we're talking about.
Wow.
Then we have the actual legislative texts on Canada's new Bill C-5, which is causing a huge storm back home. We've got reporting on Trump's controversial new Board of Peace.
Which we absolutely have to get into.
Oh, we will. And on top of that, we have some really scorching cultural critique from the blog of Christian Sarkar, which provides a completely different lens on all of this.
And the headline here, the main takeaway, isn't just some politicians gave some speeches. It's that the world order as we knew it, the rules, the treaties, the handshake agreements that kept the borders mostly static and the trade flowing, is, for all intents and purposes, dead. Carney himself called it the rupture.
The rupture. That is the key theme for today. He's arguing we're not in a transition phase anymore. The transition is over. We have landed in something else entirely.
And the central tension we need to unpack is this huge clash of worldviews. On one side, you have the America First hegemony as Donald Trump. On the other, this new strategy Carney is proposing for everyone else, something he calls values-based realism.
So our mission today is to figure out what that actually means. The old rules are gone. What replaces them?
So let's dive right into the belly of the beast. Davos, Tuesday, January 20th. Mark Carney takes the stage. And like you said, usually when a central banker or even a prime minister speaks at Davos, it's a bit of a snooze fest.
A lot of those words, yeah. Very safe.
Very safe. But Carney opens with a story about a greengrocer.
Yes, and this is such a specific and telling reference. He's not quoting Keynes or Friedman. He's quoting Václav Havel.
The Czech dissident, the playwright who became president after the Velvet Revolution.
Exactly. Havel wrote this famous essay back in 1978 called The Power of the Powerless.
I remember reading parts of this in political science classes, but refresh my memory. What is the deal with the greengrocer?
So the story Havel tells is about this greengrocer living under a repressive, post-totalitarian communist regime. Every single morning, he puts a sign in his shop window right there among the onions and carrots.
And the sign says,
"Workers of the world, unite."
A classic slogan. You see it everywhere in that kind of system.
Right. But here is the question Havel asks, and it's the brilliant part. Does the greengrocer actually believe that? Is he genuinely, passionately enthusiastic about the workers of the world uniting as he sells his potatoes?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say no. He's just trying to run his shop.
Exactly. He probably thinks it's complete nonsense. He might even hate the regime that forces him to put it up. But he puts the sign up anyway. And the question is why?
Well, to avoid trouble, right?
To avoid trouble. Because if he doesn't put the sign up, the secret police might pay him a visit. His manager might report him. His kids might suddenly find it impossible to get into university.
So the sign isn't a statement of belief at all. It's a signal of compliance. It's a shield. It just says, I'm playing the game. Leave me alone.
Precisely. Havel called this living within a lie. The system doesn't persist because everyone is a true believer. It persists because everyone pretends to believe in it. It's a performance, a ritual. As long as the sign is in the window, life goes on, the vegetable shipment arrives on time, and you stay out of trouble.
Okay, so that's 1978 Czechoslovakia. A powerful metaphor.
Hmm.
But Carney is standing in front of the masters of the universe in Davos in 2026. What's the connection he's making? Is he saying, are we the greengrocer?
That is the bombshell. That is the moment everyone in the room sat up. Carney stood up in front of the global elite and said that for the last 20 or 30 years, middle powers, countries like Canada, the UK, Germany, Japan, Australia, have all been putting a sign in our window.
And that sign says the rules-based international order.
Exactly. Oof. I mean, that cuts deep.
It really does.
He's saying, we all pretended that the World Trade Organization actually had teeth. We pretended the UN Security Council could stop conflicts. We pretended that if we just traded enough with authoritarian regimes, they'd eventually liberalize and become nice, polite democracies just like us.
All while knowing, privately, that the big guys, the United States and China, were breaking those rules whenever they felt like it.
Precisely. We knew the game was rigged. We all knew the U.S. would ignore the WTO when it suited them on steel tariffs or whatever else. We knew China was subsidizing its industries and manipulating its currency. But the fiction, the lie, it provided a certain stability.
It kept the sea lanes open. It kept the global financial systems running. It was the background noise we all agreed not to question too loudly.
Yes. But Carney's core argument is that the cost of maintaining that lie has now become too high. The lie is no longer protecting us.
So why now? What's the tipping point?
He says integration became a weapon. That's the fundamental shift. For decades, we thought more trade, more connection was always good. It would make us all richer and safer. But now that integration is being used against us.
So you're talking about things like China cutting off rare earth minerals to Japan during a dispute.
Exactly. Or Russia cutting off natural gas to Europe to achieve a political goal. Or closer to home for Canada, when tariffs are used not for economic reasons, but to coerce your political decisions. When your supply chain becomes a leash around your neck, you can't keep the sign in the window anymore.
The lie stops protecting you and it starts killing you.
It starts killing you. And so he delivered the line that is now in every headline. He said, quote, "It is time for companies and countries to take their signs down."
Wow. That gives me chills a little bit. It's an open admission that the institutions we all grew up with, the ones that define the post-war world, are effectively broken.
It is. He listed them by name. The WTO, the UN, the COP climate conferences. He said they are greatly diminished. And I think the term he used was that they're basically zombie institutions.
Zombie institutions, I like that.
They're walking around, they're holding meetings, they're publishing reports, but they have no real power to shape reality anymore. And then this brings us to the other big philosophical anchor of his speech. He didn't just diagnose the problem, he talked about the consequences.
The Thucydides trap.
Yes, the ancient Greek historian, the Melian dialogue. The strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must.
It's the classic realist, maybe even cynical view of the world. It's the law of the jungle.
It is. And in a world of unchecked great power rivalry, which is exactly what we have now with the U.S. under Trump 2.0 and China under Xi, the great fear for every country in the middle is that they just get crushed. They suffer what they must.
You're either a superpower or you're just a pawn on their chessboard. Or maybe a snack.
Exactly. Carney used that other classic line, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
But he's rejecting that fatalism, isn't he? He's not just saying, well, okay, Canada prepares to be on a menu. He's proposing a way for the middle powers to stay off it.
No, he's absolutely not surrendering. He's pivoting. He's saying that if you are a middle power, you cannot survive alone in this new world. The era of, simple bilateral negotiation where Canada goes one-on-one with the U.S. on a trade issue is over.
Why?
Because you will lose every single time. The power imbalance is just too great, so you have to change the game.
So what's the alternative? Use this phrase, variable geometry, which sounds like something I failed in high school math, but I gather it means something else here.
It does. It sounds academic, but it's actually a very practical, almost ruthless diplomatic strategy.
Okay, break it down for us.
The idea is this. Instead of trying to get all 193 countries at the UN to agree on something, which is impossible and never happens, and instead of relying on one big static alliance like NATO for every single problem,
You build custom coalitions.
you build specific, smaller coalitions for specific problems. You choose your partners based on the issue at hand, not based on some old treaty. It's fluid, it's flexible, and it's interest-based.
Okay, can you give me a concrete example from the speech? Because coalitions can sound a bit vague.
Okay, let's take critical minerals. Lithium, cobalt, copper, nickel. The stuff you absolutely need for electric vehicles, for batteries, for AI data centers, the entire future economy.
Right now, China dominates the processing of almost all of those.
Completely dominates it. So China decides to turn off the tap, our economy grinds to a halt. We saw them threaten this before. So under variable geometry, Carney proposes a buyer's club.
A buyer's club.
Anchored in the G7, you don't invite everyone. You don't go to the WTO.
Yeah.
You invite the countries that actually buy the stuff and, crucially, share your political values. You all agree to pay a bit of a premium to buy from each other or from friendly, reliable nations to guarantee your supply.
So you're basically creating a secure, parallel supply chain that's insulated from geopolitical blackmail. It's like a VIP section for trade.
That's a perfect way to put it. It costs more, but it's secure. And then he floated the really big one, the one that made people's jaws drop.
The merger of the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the EU.
Yes, a new trading bloc that merges the TPP and the European Union.
Whoa, wait a minute. That seems ambitious. The TPP is a group of Asia-Pacific countries. The EU is, well, Europe. Merging them.
Yeah.
That seems logistically and politically a nightmare.
It sounds crazy, right? But just look at the math for a second. If you could actually pull that off, if you could merge those two massive trading blocks, you would create a single market of 1.5 billion people.
Okay.
That is an economic bloc larger than the United States and larger than China.
I see. So it's about creating critical mass.
It's about creating a third pillar in the world economy.
Yeah.
If you are that big, Washington can't just bully you with random tariffs because you can hit back just as hard. And Beijing can't coerce you with supply chain threats because you have your own internal market. It's variable geometry on a massive, world-altering scale.
And he also mentioned security coalitions, right? Something about boots on the ice in the Arctic.
Yes, specifically a security coalition with the Nordic nations, so Canada, Norway, Denmark, Finland, Sweden. And again, notice the pattern. He's not going to the UN Security Council, where Russia has a veto and would block any action in the Arctic.
Right.
He's saying, we are the Arctic nations, we have the most at stake, so we are forming our own pact to patrol our own backyard. It's a classic example of bypassing the broken global institutions to get something done with a small group of willing, capable partners.
Which feels very, very relevant, given the other news this week about Trump's renewed interest in Greenland, which we will definitely get to. But first, I want to drill down on this new ideology he introduced. He puts a name on it. He calls it values-based realism.
Right. And he's careful to credit the source. He borrowed this term from Alexander Stubb, the president of Finland. And honestly, it is an attempt to thread a very, very difficult needle.
Because usually, realism in foreign policy means, well, it means we don't care about human rights. We just care about power and interests. Think Henry Kissinger.
Exactly. It's cold, it's transactional. And on the other hand, values-based foreign policy usually means we go around preaching to everyone but don't actually accomplish much because the world is a messy place.
So values-based realism is an attempt to do both.
It's an attempt to do both, which is why it's so complicated and, frankly, so controversial. The values part says we have core principles. We believe in sovereignty, human rights, territorial integrity. We aren't taking those signs down.
Okay, that's the principled part.
But the realism part says we have to be pragmatic. We have to recognize that not every country we need to deal with shares those values, and we can't just isolate ourselves.
So what does that mean in practice? Does that mean we work with bad actors?
It means you engage, but with your eyes wide open. The source material we have mentions that Canada, under Carney, has just signed new strategic partnership agreements with China and Qatar.
Which seems totally contradictory if you're just a pure idealist. China's supposed to be the main threat.
Right. That's the realism part kicking in. The logic is you insulate your critical sectors where you must, like with the Critical Minerals Club, but you engage commercially where you can. You don't go in pretending China is a democracy. You stop hoping they will change. You just deal with them transactionally to keep your own economy afloat and to manage global problems like climate. It's about survival and resilience, not about trying to change the other guy's mind.
But this isn't just abstract foreign policy talk. This new realism is hitting the ground hard in Canada with some very controversial domestic legislation. Let's talk about Bill C-5, the One Canadian Economy Act.
Yes, this is where the rubber really meets the road. If your foreign policy is that the world is becoming a world of fortresses, as Carney put it, then it logically follows that Canada needs to build up its own fortress. Bill C-5 is basically a build, baby, build law for the nation.
The sources describe it as a way to fast-track projects that are deemed to be in the national interest. We're talking pipelines, mines, new energy corridors, ports.
That's right. The stated goal is to break down internal trade barriers between Canadian provinces, which has been a huge headache in Canada for decades. But the more powerful and more controversial part is that it gives the federal cabinet the power to bypass certain regulations to get these big projects built fast.
And fast usually means skipping some steps.
What?
Skipping the parts where you ask people if they really want a massive open-pit mine in their backyard.
Well, that is the fear, and it's a very real one. The source we have from the narwhal highlights the intense backlash. The bill allows the government to bypass regular, lengthy environmental assessments if a project is deemed essential for the national interest. But the biggest flashpoint by far is Indigenous rights.
Right, because Canada has officially adopted the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or UNDRP, and that declaration requires free, prior, and informed consent. The key word there being consent.
Consent implies you have the right to say no, a veto.
And Bill C-5 seems to walk that back significantly. It talks a lot about consultation, not consent.
And that is a massive, massive legal distinction. Consultation can just mean we listened to your concerns, we took notes, and now we're going to go ahead and do what we plan to do anyway.
It's a very different power dynamic.
Completely. The source mentions a summit that Carney held with First Nations leaders where they walked away feeling, and I'm quoting here, subjugated, not consulted.
Subjugated. That is a very heavy, very loaded word.
It is, and it perfectly highlights the central tension in this whole values-based realism idea. When national survival and economic speed become the absolute top priority because you need to fend off pressure from the U.S. or compete with China, whose rights and whose values get trampled in the rush.
The government's argument would be, we need to get this lithium out of the ground now to build the batteries for our own auto industry, or we need to build this energy corridor now to secure our sovereignty.
Of course. But Indigenous leaders are pushing back and saying, wait a minute, you're bypassing our sovereignty in the name of protecting your own. It's a fundamental conflict.
It seems like the realism part of the equation might be doing a lot of the heavy lifting there. It sounds like the values part is getting a little bit quieter on the home front.
That is precisely the critique being leveled against it. And speaking of realism trumping ideology, there was another massive domestic policy shift mentioned in the sources that we have to touch on. The carbon tax is gone.
Wait, really? Mark Carney, Mr. Climate Action, the UN Special Envoy for Climate Finance. Yeah. He killed the carbon tax.
Gone. Well, the consumer-facing part is. As of April 1st, 2025, so this actually happened just before the current events of 2026, but it absolutely set the stage for this new realist pivot. Carney's government eliminated the consumer fuel charge.
Why? I mean, this is the guy who literally wrote the book on climate finance and valuing the planet.
Well, the source we have from ESG today is quite clear on the rationale. It just became too politically divisive and too inflationary. The perception was that it was hurting the average Canadian in the wallet too much, especially with rising costs everywhere else. Politics is the art of the possible, and the consumer tax had become politically impossible to maintain.
So is he abandoning climate action altogether then? Is that the message?
He argues no, absolutely not. The government kept the industrial carbon price, so the big polluters, the big emitters still have to pay. And they shifted the entire focus away from consumer taxation and toward massive incentives.
So things like heat pumps, retrofitting homes, building out the electrical grid.
Exactly. It's a strategic shift from punishing consumers for their choices to building the infrastructure so they can make better choices. Again, you can see how it fits perfectly into the realism frame. It's economic realism winning out over what was seen as ideological purity.
Okay, so that's the Canadian side of this equation. Canada is hunkering down, building a fortress, streamlining everything for national interest. But we can't talk about any of this in a vacuum. We have to talk about the reason for all this panic in the first place. Donald Trump.
The Trump 2.0 dynamic is, well, it's distinct from the first term. The sources describe an atmosphere where the so-called administrative state is being systematically dismantled via things like Project 2025. It feels more organized this time, more ruthless.
And internationally, it's even more aggressive, more transactional. Trump's comment on Carney's Davos speech was classic Trump. He said, Canada lives because of the United States.
Ouch. That's as blunt as it gets.
It's a pure power move. He's not saying you're a partner or an ally. He's saying you exist because we, in our generosity, allow you to exist. And Carney fired back.
He did. His retort was, Canada thrives because we are Canadian. It's a good, snappy comeback for the cameras, But let's be honest, the underlying power dynamic is very, very real.
And Trump isn't just throwing insults this time, he's throwing tariffs.
Mm-hmm.
And he's launching entirely new institutions that completely bypass the old ones. We absolutely have to talk about the Board of Peace.
Oh, the Board of Peace. It really sounds like something from a dystopian novel, doesn't it? Trump launched this with great fanfare at Davos.
Okay, explain this to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because the details in our source material were just wild.
So the concept is this. Donald Trump is the chairman. The board was ostensibly created to oversee the reconstruction of Gaza and, resolve other global conflicts. But the structure is unique.
Unique is one word for it.
To be a permanent member of this board, a nation has to pay a one-time $1 billion entry fee.
$1 billion.
Yeah.
1 billion US dollars to join a peace board. That's a literal paywall for global diplomacy.
Trump was incredibly blunt about it. He gave a quote. He said, "Once this board is completely formed, we can do pretty much whatever we want to do." It's explicitly transactional. You pay your billion, you get a seat at the table where the real decisions are made.
And you just have to look at who signed up, who wrote the checks.
Well, let's see. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Belarus.
Belarus is in.
Belarus is in. Hungary is in. Argentina under Milei is in. But what about the traditional U.S. allies? The UK, France, Germany, Japan.
They all declined.
They declined. They wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. They see it as a direct threat to the UN system.
And Carney. What was Canada's position on this?
This is a major plot point from the week. Initially, before his big speech, Carney seemed to be considering it. The sources have him quoted saying something like, "Canada wants money to have maximum impact." It looked like he was at least thinking about writing the check.
Hedging his bets.
Exactly. But after the rupture speech, and definitely after Trump's "Canada lives because of us," comment Carney formally withdrew Canada from consideration. Or, depending on which source you read, he was uninvited. Trump posted a copy of a letter on Truth Social, formally withdrawing the invitation.
So we now have a rival institution to the UN, run personally by the U.S. president, funded by billionaires in autocratic states, and explicitly excluding the liberal democracies that used to be America's closest friends.
That is the rupture that Carney is talking about in its most concrete form. It's not just that the U.S. is pulling back from the world, it's that the U.S. is actively creating a parallel pay-to-play order.
And it's not just about peace treaties and reconstruction contracts, it's about territory. We have to mention Greenland.
Oh, right. The Greenland Purchase idea is back. I thought that was just a bizarre joke from 2019. It's back with a vengeance. At Davos, Trump called for immediate negotiations to acquire Greenland from Denmark. He wants the natural resources and, more importantly, the strategic position it commands in the increasingly important Arctic.
Can you just buy an autonomous country in 2026? It's not a piece of real estate, it's a society of people.
Well, Trump tried to force the sale. He threatened to impose 200% tariffs on all French wine if Europe stood in the way of the deal.
He held French wine hostage for Greenland.
He did. And for a moment, it sort of worked. The markets absolutely panicked. The stock for LVMH, the luxury goods giant, dropped like a stone. Then, by the end of the day, some kind of vague NATO framework deal regarding Greenland security was announced, the tariffs were suspended, and the markets rebounded. Trump immediately declared it a huge victory.
That is terrifying speed. A crisis manufactured with a tariff threat in the morning and a deal announced by dinner.
It perfectly illustrates how volatile and unpredictable this new environment is. Diplomacy is now being conducted via tariff threats and real estate deals. If you are Mark Carney or the Prime Minister of Denmark or any middle power, you are looking at this and thinking, we need a new plan immediately.
Because the old plan, which was, call the White House and rely on our shared history and values, is completely dead.
It's dead. And so that new plan is variable geometry and values-based realism. But, and this is important, there is a very critical voice we need to bring into the conversation here. Because while Carney and the whole Davos crowd are debating how to manage this new world, some people are questioning the entire premise of their debate.
You're talking about the Christian Sartar blog posts that were in our source stack?
Yes. Sarkar offers a scathing critique of both sides of this coin, of both Trump and the Davos elite. He uses a specific term for the current situation. He calls it a kakistocracy.
Kakistocracy. I love that word. It sounds awful. What does it mean?
It comes from the Greek word kakistos, which means worst. So it literally means government by the least suitable or most incompetent citizens. Rule by the worst.
And who does he see as the worst?
He views figures like Trump and also Elon Musk, who the sources say is heavily involved in this administration, as Techno-fascists.
That is extremely strong language.
It is, but his argument is that we are all missing the forest for the trees. Carney is sitting there worried about managing trade routes and securing supply chains. Sarkar is arguing that the entire system, the global system of extraction, exploitation, the ignore the climate for profit model, is what's driving us towards total collapse. He even revisits the greengrocer analogy, but with a critical twist.
How so?
Sarkar's point is that just shifting your alliances, Carney's realism, is basically just putting a different sign in the window if you aren't addressing the underlying rot of the system itself. If you are just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, swapping a failing U.S. alliance for a shiny new TPP-EU alliance, but you're still steaming full speed towards the iceberg of climate collapse and mass inequality, you are still living within a lie.
And he specifically brings up the conflict in Gaza, doesn't he, as an example of this moral failure.
He does. The sources discuss the ongoing accusations of genocide and what Sarkar calls the moral bankruptcy of the West. Trump's Board of Peace claims it's going to solve it. But look at the mechanism. It's a buying club for nations to get a piece of the reconstruction contracts.
It's a business deal.
It's a business deal. And Sarkar points out the massive disconnect. Realism, as Carney defines it, focuses on state interests, stability, economic growth, security. It doesn't necessarily focus on the human cost, on justice, or on what Sarkar calls the common good.
So Sarkar talks about regeneration as the alternative. What is that?
Regeneration is the idea that our goal shouldn't just be to sustain the current broken status quo or even just to mitigate the damage. The goal should be to actively repair the social, economic, and natural systems that we've broken. It's a much more radical, fundamental shift than Carney's values-based realism. Carney wants to save the liberal capitalist economy. Sarkar wants to save the common good itself.
And the tension there is obvious. Carney's Bill C-5 wants to fast-track mines to build batteries to save the national economy. Sarkar might argue those very mines are destroying local ecosystems and violating indigenous rights, thereby further damaging the common good.
Precisely. The core question he raises is this. Is values-based realism actually a plan to solve the wicked problems like climate collapse, or is it just a clever survival strategy for the nation-state in a more dangerous world? Sarkar would argue it's the latter. He calls it misleadership.
There is also this huge technological layer to all of this that was all over the Davos coverage. We mentioned Elon Musk, but AI was the other massive topic of conversation.
It was, and the split in opinion there really mirrors the geopolitical split we've been talking about. On one hand, you had the tech CEOs, the builders, like Jensen Huang from NVIDIA. He's painting this incredibly rosy picture.
What's his take?
He's saying AI is the biggest infrastructure build-out in human history. It's going to create new jobs we can't even imagine. Radiologists will be more productive. Every country needs its own sovereign AI. It's all opportunity.
Build, baby, build. But for data centers and GPUs.
Exactly. But then you have the implementation guys, the people actually building the large language models, like Dario Amodei from Anthropic. His view was much more stark. He flat out predicted that AI could eliminate 50% of entry-level white-collar jobs.
50%.
Yes.
Pause on that number for a second.
Yeah.
50% of entry-level jobs. That's not just factory workers. That's junior lawyers, accountants, copywriters, coders, graphic designers. That is a social bomb waiting to go off.
It is. The IMF published a report just before Davos calling it a potential tsunami hitting the global labor market. And this connects directly back to Carney's realism. Why is Canada suddenly so desperate to build its own AI infrastructure and secure its own critical mineral supply chains?
Because if you don't, you're not a sovereign nation anymore.
You're not. If you don't control your own AI sovereignly, you are forced to choose between what one source called hegemons and hyperscalers.
You're either a vassal of American big tech, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, or you're a vassal of Chinese state tech.
Exactly. If you don't have your own compute, your own models, your own data, you aren't really a sovereign country in the year 2026. You're a client state, a digital colony.
This brings up another key concept from the sources, the idea of de-Americanization. I saw that term in the notes from the Giorgio source.
Yes, Giorgio is a former Singaporean foreign minister. He's always incredibly insightful on Asian geopolitics. He argues that what we're seeing across Asia isn't necessarily anti-Americanism, it's anti-dependency.
That's the distinction there.
Anti-Americanism is an ideological hatred of America. Anti-dependency is a pragmatic realization that the U.S. system, which is highly financialized, intensely polarized, and increasingly erratic under Trump, is no longer a reliable foundation upon which to build your own country's future.
It's the greengrocer taking the sign down again, just on a global scale.
It is. Yeo points out that the ASEAN nations, all of Southeast Asia, are trying desperately not to choose sides in the U.S.-China conflict. They want the Americans security. So they're trying to create their own third space, their own rules. And he makes a very bold prediction.
Yes.
He predicts the dominance of the U.S. dollar will eventually break.
That seems almost unthinkable. The dollar is king. The entire global system runs on it.
It is today.
Yeah.
But Yeo argues that the increasing weaponization of the financial system, using sanctions, seizing central bank assets, is accelerating the search for alternatives. If you are a country and you can't be sure that your money is safe in U.S. dollars because the U.S. president might get mad at you one day and freeze it, you start looking for other options.
So you start trading in other currencies or building new payment systems.
Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but the trend line is clear. And every step in that direction leads to a more fragmented world, a world of fortresses.
That seems to be the destination. So let's try to bring all these threads together. We have moved from a single, messy, but at least somewhat functioning global order to what? What is this new map?
We have moved to a world of naked power politics. The mask is completely off, the rules-based order is dead, and it has been replaced by values-based realism for the middle powers who are scrambling to survive, and a kind of transactional hegemony for the great powers.
It feels like everyone is retreating into their own castles and pulling up the drawbridges.
In many ways, yes. And for you, the listener, the so what here is pretty significant. The era of cheap, seamless, predictable global trade is likely over for good.
Meaning that the stuff we buy gets more expensive.
Much more expensive over time. Resilience costs money. Building your own factories in Canada instead of China, mining your own lithium instead of buying it on the open market, patrolling your own Arctic waters, that costs way, way more than the hyper-efficient globalized system we had. Expect prices to go up.
I expect the government to get much more involved in our lives and the economy.
Absolutely. National interest policies mean the government intervenes directly in the economy. They pick winners and losers. They protect certain industries with tariffs. We're seeing that with Bill C-5. And they focus on hard power.
Military spending, resource control, border security.
Exactly. While soft power, things like diplomacy, foreign aid, cultural exchange, is taking a serious backseat. It's a harder, more dangerous world.
It's a sobering picture. We started this deep dive with a story about a greengrocer taking down a sign, and we ended up in a world of fortresses, billion-dollar peace boards, and AI-driven job tsunamis.
It's a lot to process, but I think Carney would argue that admitting the reality is the painful but necessary first step. You can't start to fix the problem if you are still living within the lie.
True. But it does leave me with this one final nagging question. Carney says we have to take the sign out of the window and stop lying about the rules-based order. He wants to replace it with values-based realism. But in a world that is openly acknowledging that the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must, whose values actually win in the end?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it? If we are all just building bigger, stronger fortresses to survive, have we actually fixed the fundamental problem of the system? Or have we just admitted, finally, that might makes right?
And when the new board of peace costs $1 billion just to get a seat at the table, is peace just another luxury product for sale?
From the perspective of Davos this week, it certainly looks that way.
Something for all of us to think about as we watch the news this weekend. Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll be watching very closely to see which signs go up in the windows next.
Indeed. Until next time.
Take care.